My name is Dr. Stacy Potter, and I will be your host for this evening. Families Connect is a free speaker series offered to our parents, students, staff, and community members with information related to a variety of topics, such as how to support your child in the learning process and recognize strategies to support them at home as well. As a part of the Families Connect series, we invite expert speakers to offer guidance around relevant parenting topics. We also encourage community conversations that are centered around practical strategies to support learning and child development. All right, Neshaminy, here we go. I am so happy to introduce David Fialko from the Council for Southeast Pennsylvania. David is a nationally certified tobacco treatment specialist and internationally certified prevention specialist with over 20 years working in the field of public health and addiction sciences. David is employed by the Council of Southeast Pennsylvania, Inc. Funding for these efforts are made possible by the Bucks County Drug and Alcohol Commission. So hello, David. It is such a pleasure to welcome you to Neshaminy's Family Connect. We are so grateful to have you join us this evening for this very important discussion. Are you ready to begin?
Thank you, Dr. Potter. Yes. So great. Thank you for the invite. I always jump at the opportunity to have a conversation with parents. Myself, I'm a parent of a 10-year-old here in a nearby school district. And so this is something that is, unfortunately, we're seeing at younger and younger ages. My boy is in the 5th grade. His elementary goes to the 6th grade. And then when he moves to middle school, the 6th grade is going to follow him there. So he's one of the last of his school to finish elementary and 6th grade, which is, a little bit of relief. Because one of the other things that I do in my position at the council is I counsel young people for policy violations related to ATOD, alcohol, tobacco, other drug use. And what I'm seeing most of my time spent now are on 2 things, nicotine and marijuana. And it's not uncommon to have 6th and 7th graders in the mix here. So, if we can keep them kind of protected for like that one extra year to allow for some brain development,
Right.
I'm all for it. So this is really, for anybody who has a middle school or high school student. Is there more information suitable for high school versus middle school? On these 2 topics, not really, because they're going to be so similar. So let me see here. There we go. I can't say enough thanks to our funders. Our funding comes from a broad variety of sources, federal grants, state grants, as well as single county authorities, which Bucks County Drug and Alcohol Commission is. They're kind of a one-stop shop for all of your, any type of services that you may need related to alcohol, tobacco, and other drugs. So they fund my time so that there's no charge to the schools for this. My time is covered through the Bucks County Drug and Alcohol. So thank you to them. That is their website, their phone number, if you ever need services, or recommendations on where to get services. So I have 4 main goals. We're going to talk about current trends in nicotine use. We're going to talk about the addictive properties. We're going to discuss some of the health risks associated with nicotine use. And then we'll discuss some resources for not only parents, but educators and communities as well, because I believe we have a mix in here. We have some parents and we have some school staff who attended. Sometimes the school staff are the community, the parents. So before we jump in there, if you don't mind, if everybody has a phone nearby, if you don't mind scanning this and taking a short 4 or 5 question free test. And then at the end, I'm going to ask you these same questions. And what the Bucks County Drug and Alcohol Commission, since they're paying for my time here, they like to see is that people are actually benefiting from this money that they're spending on these efforts. So you'll likely get these wrong in the beginning, and then in a perfect world at the end, you'll get them right. So I'll give just maybe a minute to take these. And you don't have to put too much thought, just go with what you think is right. Because at the end, then you'll be able to take an extra minute to apply what you've heard over the next hour and 20 minutes. Sounds like a lot of time, but I promise it'll feel like it goes pretty fast.
So if you're not sure how to scan this QR code, you click on the camera app on your phone and you just point your phone to the bar chart QR code configuration, and a little box will kind of like frame it out on your phone, and then you click the link that shows up next to the box.
All right. I'm not sure if you see participants, if you see reactions or no, I don't think I see reactions on here. All right. I think that's enough time. I don't want to bore too many people, so we'll move on. All right. So, one of the things when we're talking about alcohol, nicotine, or other drugs, and we used to call this ATOD. That was the acronym for it: alcohol, tobacco, and other drugs. And so when we were referring to tobacco, that was really like the kind of the form of nicotine that most kids were and young people were experimenting with up until 2008, 2007. And so now we're not seeing young people start experimenting with tobacco. We're starting to see young people experiment with nicotine. And so we are seeing that transition to phasing out the term tobacco and referring to alcohol, nicotine, and other drugs. Dr. Potter, I'm not sure. Do I hear a voice somewhere in the back? It sounds like there might be somebody unmuted. Or maybe that's echo. Now that I hear it,
I'll mute myself. Let me see if that helps.
All right. I think that did it. I think it was an echo for me. Yeah. All right. So really some of the main risk factors are going to be access, purity, and perceived level of harm. Those are kind of like the holy trinity, right? Anytime something is easy to access, it's going to be more readily available. And, and when something's easily available, there's not a lot of planning or time put into it, which takes away the young person's ability to have time to think about the consequences. So with ease of access, there's no time to think. And most young people now report that they can find, a vape device or a gram of marijuana simply within maybe 15, 20 minutes, a half an hour. In most schools, all right, most school districts, this doesn't reflect on the schools or anything any school is not doing. It's just that this is so prominent. You can go into the highest rated school district in the country, and you're going to find kids who can find nicotine and marijuana in a very short period of time. And again, this isn't the school's fault. This is society's issues. So access is a huge one. Zip code doesn't matter. Purity. We've never seen purer nicotine than what the young people are using now. And I'll explain what that means, and including marijuana. So we're going to be really talking about nicotine and marijuana tonight. Mostly nicotine at the end. We'll talk about some marijuana or THC products, but both are purer than any previous generation had exposure to, which then increases some of the potential for harm associated with those substances. And then the perception of harm. So we have a very low perceived level of harm about nicotine. We have a very low perceived level of harm about marijuana, but we have a fairly high perceived level of harm about tobacco. So traditional cigarettes, right? So it's kind of interesting because when I was in high school in the 80s, we had a very low perceived level of harm about tobacco. We actually had student smoking sections. I grew up in Northeast Jersey. In my high school, we had a student smoking section. You could go out and smoke with the teachers and vice versa. You could bum cigarettes off teachers and teachers could bum cigarettes off the students. Access was very easy. Every corner store sold to kids. It wasn't uncommon to see, 12, 13, 14-year-olds walking around town, hanging out in the park, smoking cigarettes. It was kind of a run-of-the-mill kind of thing about 40% of the population smoked cigarettes where I grew up in Northeast Jersey. The chief of police, the teachers, parents. So it was very common. Now we're seeing somewhere around 14 or 15% of that same population are still tobacco users. But what we're seeing is a huge rise in nicotine use, the vaping, because it has a low perceived level of harm. So anytime perceived level of harm is low, purity is high, and access is easy, we have an increase in this bell curve. All right, we're on the upswing of this graph. Age of exposure, I have that in there because that is really kind of, something that we want to take into account. A lot of times people are like, well, I did it and I turned out okay. What we were exposed to is nothing like what these youth are being exposed to. And all the research shows that for every year you can delay the onset or exposure to experimentation of any drug, it decreases the likelihood of that individual experiencing a substance use disorder in their adult years by approximately 6 or 7%. So if you can get your child, your young person, your young adult to 21 without experimenting, or at least minimal exposure, minimal experimentation, then you're going to have good outcomes. Right? And theoretically, adults can use alcohol and marijuana and nicotine responsibly occasionally as adults because our brains are fully formed. But again, that's in theory, right? And we all know that adults can fall into substance use disorders, whether that's alcohol use disorder, nicotine, tobacco use disorder, or cannabis use disorder. It's just tends to be harder for adults to slip into that because their foundational brain is cured. One of the things we refer to vaping as is ENDS. All right, that's an FDA, Food and Drug Administration term. That's how we refer to it. Electronic nicotine delivery system, because it's not really vaping; it's actually aerosoling. But the main component of ENDS is an e-liquid containing cartridges or refillable tanks combined with nicotine, and these ingredients are often FDA approved. However, these ingredients are only FDA approved for one thing, and that's food, and food only: ingestion, digestion, and evacuation. They've never been approved for heating and inhalation. And as soon as you heat and inhale these substances, the molecular structure changes, and also their interaction with your lung tissue and respiratory system is quite different than your digestive tract. So these things have never been approved for heating and inhalation, yet the industry is using the slogan FDA approved ingredients. They're using them in a medical term off-label. They're using them in something that has never been tested or approved. And most of these vape products now contain either nicotine salts and benzoic acids or fully synthetic nicotine, which I'll get to. But benzoic acid it's an irritant to the nose, throats, and lung when inhaled, and it will cause coughing, wheezing, and shortness of breath. However, because these nicotine salts are so pure, they can add a little benzoic acid and it's not going to be intense. Typically, tobacco, very harsh, makes you want to cough. It's a hard throat hit. Nicotine salts have been designed to be very smooth and non-irritating. And so young people can not only do it more often and frequently, but now they can take a deeper, larger inhalation of it and hold it for longer periods of time, thus delivering a higher level of nicotine to their bloodstream. So these ingredients are being manipulated to allow for a higher level of use, which increases profits, targets younger generations, which are not into the throat hit or that harshness that's associated with smoking, and allows the response to be more effective. And when I say response, I'm referring to the primary reason why people use nicotine. And when I work with individuals who are trying to smoke, most of the people who I work with, I would say 95% of the people I work with, adult-wise, not child-wise, adult-wise, are smokers. And when a new smoker comes in, I do an assessment. I ask them very specific questions that are designed to show their level of dependency on nicotine, such as how long from the moment you wake up in the morning till your first cigarette. Do you wake up at night to smoke? There's a variety of questions. But one of the things I always ask, which is not actually part of the assessment, but just gives information for me so I know where to go, is what's your main reason for smoking? And 80% of smokers report to help with stress. And so they're primarily self-medicating to address emotional problems, right? They find it works as an antidepressant, as a tranquilizer, an answer for some of the negative emotions that they may experience and feelings of solace. And does that actually work? Yes, but when it wears off, you actually feel worse than before you started. And I'll explain this in a graph. Hopefully it'll enlighten some people to where it's a little easier to digest. And for months or years after giving up, we still crave nicotine, because as with Prozac or any other psychotropic medication, it improves our mood, right? Except Prozac and Valium are prescribed by medical professionals who know how to titrate, who take into consideration of your current level of serotonin and dopamine levels, and they manipulate your neurotransmitters accordingly. That's why they go to school for years and years to understand this, right? Now with nicotine, you're just kind of spaghetti on a wall, throwing and seeing what sticks. And for most people, it doesn't end well. And it can actually throw off. If somebody is taking psychotropic medications for anxiety, ADHD, depression, any of those things, nicotine can throw off the titration of those and actually increase the negative symptoms associated with those disorders. But regardless, nicotine is perceived to have a profound beneficial effect on the emotional state of people who might also benefit from psychotropic medication. And these are undiagnosed populations, right? These are individuals who may start to show features of possible diagnosis, in their teen years. And so when a young person finds that nicotine response, it seems to fit better than maybe their peer or their cohort who doesn't have some of these symptoms associated with, undiagnosed possible, disorders. And nicotine also is a stimulant drug. All right. It is. It stimulates us. It actually improves our concentration and performance on tasks that demand these while we're using. But again, when it wears off, we actually lose that performance, and we're worse than we were before. But this is kind of, I like to use the example of cubicles in the 70s and 80s, cubicle workspaces. And if you had two cubicles, you had a smoker in one cubicle, a non-smoker in the other cubicle, and they were right next to each other. And you had, had TPS reports and a stack of papers that you had to have done by the end of the day. And it was stressful. There was no ambient light. There wasn't fresh air. You had deadlines. You had to get this done. The non-smoker felt anxiety, felt stress, no outlet for pleasure or relaxation or what we call dopamine, naturally produced mood improving neurotransmitter. And so they were constantly feeling stressed. So their production was slow and steady. Whereas the smoker who was smoking at their desk had cigarettes that improved their focus and delivered or increased the release of dopamine in their neural network. And so now they were improving their focus and improving their mood while smoking a cigarette at their desks. In the 70s and 80s, smokers were actually more productive in those settings, if you can believe that. And once the Clean Indoor Air Act was actually, enforced, it was implemented in 1971, but it wasn't enforced until the mid-90s. Once the mid-90s started enforcing that, you saw smoking outside of the building, right? We saw Clean Indoor Air Acts being enforced. Now that smoker had to leave their desk once an hour, go down 3 flights of stairs outside for 5 to 10 minutes at a time, smoke a cigarette, improve their mood, improve their focus, which would last for 20 minutes. They would return to their desk and they'd be focused and improved mood for the next 20 minutes. And then it would wear off. Now they're in early stages of withdrawal, which progresses to protracted withdrawal of nicotine. Now they become agitated, unfocused, and less productive than the non-smoker next to them for the remaining 35 or 40 minutes of that hour. So now smokers became less productive than the slow and steady non-smoker. And that's what we have seen with young people, students who go into a classroom for an hour to an hour and 10-minute periods, is that they're vaping before they go into the classroom. They may be focused for 20 minutes and then it wears off. And now they're having a difficult time of focusing, retaining, and recalling the information that they're learning or learned. And so they may not go from an A to an F, but they may likely go from an A to a B because they're finding it difficult to stay on task without the nicotine present in their bloodstream. So this is kind of what we look at. This is dopamine. And the way we look at this is baseline is right here. Let me, excuse me for a second. I'm going to try and annotate here. Let's see the controls. Let's see here. My apologies. Annotate. Here we go. Okay, just for ease, I'm going to use one color. So when we look at this line right here, all right, this is kind of our baseline. This is where we wake up every morning. And when we wake up, we're not feeling sad, we're not feeling happy, we're just neutral. And we look forward to improving our mood. We're all individuals, human beings. We engage in drug-seeking behaviors every day, except for most of us. Drug-seeking behavior includes things like conversations with loved ones, hobbies, activities, working out, taking the dog for a walk, work, school. And I say work because a lot of people actually enjoy their work. I know educators do. Sorry, I had to plug that one out there. But it is true. Every teacher I met does it because they actually enjoy it and they get dopamine from it. So different things respond differently to how much skill and effort. So when we engage in a conversation with a loved one, right? First thing in the morning, maybe your child wakes up and you see them, you're so excited to see them. And, you engage in small chitty chat and they're still happy to see you at whatever age they're at. And you both receive about a 5% increase in dopamine. Right? It's there, last few seconds, and then it's gone. I think I'm going to actually try and draw because my fingers are too big and it looks like I'm smudging the screen here. And then, well, actually, maybe it's the line thickness. There it is. All right. And then you continue because you want to feel it again. You're like, hey, brain, that was great. Hook me up with some more. And the brain's like, no, nothing's for free. You have to do that again. Get back in that conversation. If you want some more dopamine, you have to work for it. And so you're engaging in these little conversations throughout the morning with your loved ones. And every time you get a 5% hit of dopamine. When it wears off, it returns you to baseline. All right. It's kind of like the old carrot on the end of the stick. You're constantly chasing this dopamine. That's 5%. All right. A good joke. I tell my 10, almost 11-year-old horrible dad jokes every morning because I try to stimulate dopamine with him. Dad jokes like, what'd the shark say when it ate the clown? Tastes funny. What do you call an exactly? It's so bad that they don't laugh right away. It's only when you both laugh together about how terrible it is that you actually get the dopamine. What do you call an angry carrot? A steamed vegetable. So these are the things that we try. It takes a little bit of effort. 5% increases, right? 5%. Doesn't sound like a lot. But when we're talking about dopamine, a drug that improves our mood, we should look at 5% as quite a lot of dopamine. It would be the same as if we got a 5% pay raise every year, we would probably be pretty excited about that. Because 5% doesn't sound like a lot when you're just looking at 5%, but 5% of your annual pay, that can add up. And that's how dopamine works. We value it. The brain values it the same as we value monetary value in the world. So that's just conversations, joke, interactions, creates bond, trust, love, right? When we are at social settings, when your children are at social settings, social anxiety kicks in. And what they're looking for is dopamine, but they're nervous. So they might gravitate towards one group of people. And if they start talking or interacting with them and there's no dopamine, they're going to gravitate to another, move on to another group and wait for dopamine to be there until they find that group of people where they're talking to them like, oh yeah, right. You like the Eagles? I like the Eagles too. Or maybe they're a Yankees fan and there's maybe 5 Yankees fans in the room. Until they find that Yankees fan, they might not get that dopamine. But when they do, then it creates friendships, bonds. And that's just 5%. And then you have things like art, culture, music, academics, getting good grades. It's about 15% increase from baseline. Now, the great thing about these is when they wear off, you just simply return to baseline. So every time a young person gets an A or a B or whatever their grade they're shooting for, they get it. It's amazing. Feels great. It's there. Last few seconds, and then it's gone. And they're like, hey, brain, that was awesome. Hook me up some more of that. Brain's like, no, nothing's for free. You got to work for it. Do that again. Just don't do it again. Do it better. And so it motivates that young person, put forth more effort to improve their skill set so that they can continue to get these doses of dopamine. And sometimes when you're in a class that you enjoy and you're getting these 15% increases in dopamine from performing tasks that are assigned to you or tests and whatnot, and you're responding well to it, you're also getting that camaraderie of classmates and maybe other classmates looking up to you and looking to you for answers. So that creates little 5% hits as well as 15% hits. It's like this drug cocktail that young people thrive on. They need this. They need this. They're supposed to be experimenting with hobbies, interests, sports, academics, what classes, what extras can they try, and find out where their skill sets lie, because they're going to try things that don't produce dopamine. And when they try something that doesn't produce dopamine, they should try something else until they find something that produces the dopamine. Now, sports, physical activity, about 25%. This is the number one way to get dopamine released into the brain. This is by far the most effective source. And it has profound benefit for not only mental wellness and mental health, but also physical well-being and physical health. The more you exercise, the lower your resting heart rate is, the less stress, the less norepinephrine and noradrenaline, our fight or flight chemicals, are produced. The calmer we are in general, the more, we're able to navigate stressful situations if we simply exercise for approximately 20 minutes, a minimum of 20 minutes a day, right? And while we're engaging in these exercise routines, whether it's team sports or other sports or working out or weightlifting, you're also getting these camaraderie, these 5%. And if it's a team sport, maybe you're getting the 15 when you're working out plays and more intellectual part of the sports. So you're getting this huge drug natural cocktail. And it always drops you back off to baseline. Now, here's how nicotine works. Nicotine requires no skill, no effort. Oh, I might add, 25% is really it. We don't release more than 25% in our brain because it's a commodity, and it's a limited commodity, and it's highly valued. And so the brain holds on to it as a source of motivation. All right. Some of you might be wondering, where's sweet and salty foods? It's between 5 and 10%. All right. And yeah, so we're actually getting high naturally when we eat dark chocolate. Hopefully the stuff without the lead, as you read in the news, right? And we're salty potato chips. That's why you can never eat just one, because it's stimulating dopamine production, and we want more of it. We're like, oh my God, it's so good, right? So this is natural. Nicotine, no skill, no effort. Anybody can do it. When you inhale nicotine, whether it's smoke, aerosol, vapor, right? It crosses the bloodstream into the bloodstream instantly through the lung tissue, and it increases your dopamine by about 10%. And now it's not short acting. It's not there and then it's gone. It lasts about 15 to 20 to 25 minutes. And the first couple times a young person tries it, it returns them to baseline. For the first couple of weeks, it returns them to baseline. And that young person now all of a sudden goes like, oh, wow, look at that, man. When I'm really stressed, in between classes or at the end of the day or during my job, I don't have to necessarily seek out my friends to get my little 5% hits. All I need to do is just smoke this or vape this or aerosol this, and I feel better. And so it moves from experimentation to use relatively quickly. And I can attest to this. I smoked from 1984 until 1996 in the 7th into 8th grade summer. When I was getting my dad's pack apart in the flip-top box for him from the milk store down around the corner, we decided that, hey, let's get an extra pack and we'll go to the woods and we'll smoke those. And so we became smokers. And in the beginning, the summer entering 8th grade. And we discovered this, that, hey, it makes you feel less stressed. But it also does something very insidious. After you begin to use it regularly, when it wears off, it doesn't return you to baseline. It actually puts you what we call in the basement in the field. It resets your baseline to anxious and stressed. And so now it stays there until you use nicotine again. And it can take anywhere from 2 weeks to 3 weeks, 4 weeks, once you are in this stage here, for that baseline to reset to normal. So if you don't smoke, you stay in this basement for an extended period of time. And if you're trying to quit, you'll try to find those friends that once made you laugh and, to try to re-engage in those things and the conversations. The only problem with that is you're starting from a new baseline. And that 5% doesn't even get you to neutral. And it only lasts a few seconds. One thing I found very interesting when I was a smoker and I had the opportunity to walk across campus, and I had opportunity to either walk with friends who didn't smoke or walk with strangers who smoked, I chose the strangers. Because if I walked with friends, I would just get these little short duration 5% increases that lasted a few seconds and then gone. By the time I got to my next class, I would still be in withdrawal, feeling anxious, less focused, more difficult to learn and retain and recall information. And so that's why smokers typically surround themselves with smokers to bring them back up. And so this is how nicotine interferes with a young person's ability to form relations, to experiment with healthy pro-social things. Right? It kind of takes the edge off. That's 5%. What does 15% look like? Right? And what does 25% look like? So those two things register above baseline, but when it wears off, you're back to agitated. So we're not going to see a young person lose interest in things like sports and academics necessarily when they start vaping or when they become dependent on nicotine. That's why it's so widely accepted. That's why we have such a low perceived level of harm about it. because most kids who vape aren't going to drop off of the sports team that they're on. They're not going to see, the movement from A's to F's. They might move from, a 3.9 to a 3.4 or a 3.5. And, maybe they can use like, this is just a difficult year. I'm having a hard time with the subject. But in reality, while they're in class, they're having a difficult time learning, recalling, storing information, and staying on task and focus. And what you'll see the major change is the friends, because that is going to be the determining factor of who they hang out with. Most young people who vape do not associate or hang out with on a regular basis. Their besties are typically not going to be individuals who don't vape, because the young people now have a voice and they're very comfortable speaking up, and they're very comfortable saying, "Oh, if you're going to vape, man, don't do that around us," right? We're not into that. And so that young person now starts to surround themselves with other people who vape and start to drift away. So that's a warning sign, right? So let's see if there's some questions. I want to make sure. Doc, how was this? Was this fairly easily digestible?
Yeah, I think that you're doing a great job. I like that you are illustrating exactly what happens, in the brain and the reaction to these different types of stimulants. We do have a question. You kind of just touched upon it a little bit. When children are in a group of friends, and let's say a particular friend is starting to experiment and is trying to convince the other kids that they should try it as well, what could we offer our children to say as the, almost like candid go-to response?
Yeah, boy. I guess that'll be in my book. Yeah. So really, the conversation has to start at home, right? The family has to have clear expectations, and clear consequences for behaviors, first of all, that are going to help motivate the young person navigate. Well, as parents, we're kind of the rumble strips on the highway, right? When a kid veers off the highway, hopefully we push them back into their lane. And that's done by, clear expectations, clear understanding, and, clear consequences associated with behaviors. But that's not enough. We also have to provide them with the knowledge base. And that's why schools often bring individuals in to talk to the health classes about this topic and give them that knowledge base so that they can take the knowledge and apply it. Because unfortunately, the just say no, it doesn't work. We have to give them a reason to say no. And if that reason is going to be one of two things, excuse me, it's either going to be parental disapproval, right, and clear understanding and clear consequences, or personal motivation due to the knowledge held, right? And when you look at statistics, 75% of kids have tried alcohol or nicotine in their lifetime when they graduate high school. All right. But that number drops to like 25% when you're talking about 30-day use. All right. But out of that 25% of lifetime use who never tried, you know what their number one reason was for never trying? It was parental disapproval. They didn't want to disappoint their parents. They didn't want to lose trust. So it's huge to have the conversations at home, right? And I hate to say it, but modeling, right? We got to model the behaviors that we want, because if we're smoking and we're telling them not to smoke, the rumble strips are not there, right? The clear expectations are kind of miscommunicated. These are my set of rules. These are your set of rules. And yes, we can have those in life, but modeling really does come down to a lot. And then I always talk to young people, and I talk to my boy, Thank God he takes after my wife. My wife was a non-smoker, right? She was like summa cum laude, top of her class. I was the smoker, could have done better, right? So thank God he takes after her. But I still have the conversation with him, just say no. I just said it. I know. I say, just say no doesn't work. But what I'm saying is he already has all the reasons to say no if he wants to. And if he says no, and then the kids continue to push, oh, come on, just try it. He can, if it's a good friend, suggest an alternative. Nah, dude, I'm good. Be a leader, not a follower. Let's go shoot some hoops instead. Nah, I really want to hit this vape. All right, man. Then cool. I'm going to go shoot some hoops. You know where to find me if you change your mind, but don't bring that. And you leave and you walk away. If it's not a good friend, you don't even need to give the opportunity to suggest an alternative. You can just be like, nah, I'm out later. But I always encourage young people to be leaders, not followers. And you can flip the script. When you feel pressured to become a follower, you can flip it on them and become a leader. But they really need the information. They need to know the reasons why they want to be a leader on them. I don't know. Did I answer your question, Doc, or whoever asked that question?
Yeah. And I love that you're saying flip the script, put themselves in a leadership role.
Yeah.
So they're not feeling the pressure from somebody else who's trying to be the negative leader. They could be the positive leader. I love that. Thank you.
You got it. Absolutely. All right. So let's see. There we go. So nicotine, highly addictive, distributed quickly through the bloodstream. And it gives that dopamine, which I just described, right? And it acts as a stimulant, as I described in the cubicle. So those combination of things, that's why it's so addictive, is because socially it's kind of perceived as, it's not like it's a real drug, right? Nobody's going to knock over a 7-Eleven for, a cigarette. You're just going to be a little grouchy when you don't have it. But then when we look at nicotine, versus tobacco, we start to ask questions like, what's the difference, versus, nicotine versus tobacco? Well, tobacco had carbon monoxide, right? Combusting of a plant material, freebasing of nicotine at the end of a cigarette. It transferred to the bloodstream, and that carbon monoxide had a result on lots of different, body functions, everything from, increasing the amount of cholesterol that's deposited on the inner linings of the arteries, to increasing likelihood of heart attack, and that's carbon monoxide. Now, it's interesting because when I ask individuals, what do you think the number one reason for death among smokers is? Most people, I would say probably 90% of people say lung cancer. And that's not accurate. The number one reason, the number one cause of death among smokers is coronary heart disease, heart attack. And it's not caused by carbon monoxide. It's actually caused by nicotine, because nicotine is a central nervous system stimulant. We're not going to talk about dopamine. We're going to talk about the stimulant effect that improves focus and concentration. It also puts your body into physical stress. It's a stimulant. Increases heart rate, which increases heart rate, constricts arteries and blood vessels, which increases blood pressure. Right? Every time somebody doses off of nicotine, immediate increase in heart rate anywhere from 98 beats per minute to 105 beats per minute, up from whatever your average resting heart rate is around 75 beats per minute. All right. So now your heart is beating faster. Arteries and blood vessels constrict, which make that heart work harder, which increases blood pressure, which produces an overmuscular heart. You're essentially, every time you use nicotine, you're inducing the disease of high blood pressure, which is like, when you really think of it, every time somebody uses nicotine, they induce the disease of high blood pressure for 15 to 20 minute increments. Now, my generation, we probably averaged anywhere from 10 to 12 cigarettes a day. in my high school in Northeast Jersey for those who were smokers. And man, those smoking sections were packed. All right. So on average, 3 to 4 hours a day, my generation was looking at increased heart rate, constricted arteries, constricted blood pressure, constricted arteries, increased blood pressure for 3 to 4 hours a day. Probably doubling the likelihood of coronary heart disease in our adult years if we continue to smoke. Now, what we're looking at with nicotine now, with vaping, is it's not 10 or 11 cigarettes worth. Because we only smoked 10 or 11 cigarettes because that's all the time we had. In school, maybe we were lucky to smoke, 4 or 5 in between classes. Sometimes we'd refry, we put one out halfway through and then relight it the next, because you only had 5 minutes in the smoking section. So, even though it was readily accepted, we still couldn't smoke everywhere. Now, when we look at vaping, what we're seeing is young people are using vape devices everywhere and anywhere. They don't even need to exhale. You can just take a micro hit and swallow it. You don't even need to exhale it. Now that nicotine, because it's such a high purity and nicotine salt, very concentrated amount of nicotine, it increases their heart rate. It constricts their arteries, constricts their blood pressure, increases their blood pressure for 15 to 20 minutes at a time. And as soon as they lose that dopamine rush after that 15 or 20 minutes as well, redose, because they can literally walk down the hallway and hit their vape pen. And we may want to say, well, why doesn't the school do something about this? Well, because they can't. It's so stealthy. These young people are so good at hiding it. We can't intrude on their privacy. We can't. I mean, we catch them when we can, but it's almost impossible. And so young people now, from the moment they wake up in the morning till the moment they go to bed, increased heart rate, constricted arteries, constricted blood vessels, and increased blood pressure, the disease of high blood pressure. As a public health professional, I'm very concerned about our health outcomes for this generation. I'm looking at, hypothesis, and I consult with like pulmonologists too. And they're all very worried that in another 10 to 15 years, we're going to see a pandemic of 30-year-olds with overmuscular hearts, deteriorated arteries, and chronic blood pressure and damaged hearts. And essentially a 30-year-old having the heart of a 70-year-old at record numbers, because we've never seen a generation use nicotine at this level, a pure nicotine. All right. So this is, what was originally designed as a quitting aid was quickly bought up by the tobacco industry. Here's a little tidbit. In 2008, we had about 15% of the US population were smokers. They were almost going out of business. For the last 2 decades, they had seen a decrease in number of new smokers. The only people who were buying cigarettes were the older people who were going to die off, and then they would have no more customers. They were ready to pull up their stakes in the American market and focus on European and developing countries, where the smoking rates are still very high and profitable. And then this vaping industry came in and it's like, oh, healthy alternative to smoking. We're going to help you quit. And they freaked out. They're like, oh my gosh, this is the nail in the coffin for us. But they're genius. And instead of fighting it, they bought it. And they took something and they marketed it as the healthy alternative to smoking. Not a quitting aid, which it was originally designed for, but as a replacement aid. And what they already knew was that a replacement, or the healthy alternative to smoking, was going to target young people. And they were going to make it trendy with flavors and flair and attractive young people using their products in their commercials. They ripped the page out of the tobacco books from the 70s and 80s. Camel Joe, the young, happy people smoking. And it worked. And so now, for the last 3 years, we've seen the first time an increase in new smokers. Because today's vapors are tomorrow's smokers, and they know that. So the tobacco industry invested in the vape industry as not only the saving part of their industry, but as an introductory aid to smoking. So something that was originally designed as a quitting aid became an introductory aid. Now, nicotine also has a very interesting effect on the way that it works in the cells. So all of our cells, we have built-in kind of, the function to where if a mutation occurs during mitosis, cellular division, mutations are typically deemed as unfavorable situations. And so the cell will send out lysosomes and try and fix it. And if they can't fix that mutation, the cell enters what's called apoptosis, or programmed cellular death, self-destructs. Because the cell knows that if there's a mutation, we can't allow it to reproduce, because then you'll end up with 2 mutated cells, and then 4, and then 8, and 100, and 1,000, and that becomes a mass of mutated cells, which we know is a tumor, and that tumor is either benign or cancerous. So our bodies have this apoptosis, programmed cellular death. We're constantly using it. We're constantly fighting mutations that are occurring due to environmental exposure to carcinogenic and toxic exposure through the water we drink, the food we eat, the air we breathe, the environments which we interact with. If it wasn't for this feature, we would all end up with quite severe cancers, right? Nicotine, what we're seeing, and we just learned this like 5 years ago in the laboratory. What we see is nicotine, when exposed to cells, takes away the cell's ability to enter apoptosis, or programmed cellular death. So for smokers in previous generations, the people who smoked 10 or 11 cigarettes a day, they were taking away their body's ability to fight cancers for 3 to 4 hours a day. All right. Now, once the nicotine was quickly metabolized and left the exposure to those cells, then the cells would regain that function. But when you continually expose these cells to nicotine, they don't regain apoptosis. And so now this generation, that is from the moment they go to wake up to the moment they go to sleep, not only is it increased heart rate, constricted arteries and blood vessels, increased blood pressure, disease of high blood pressure, but it's also they're taking away their body's ability to fight cancers. So
can I ask a question? Can I ask a question really quickly? So if they are taking away their body's ability to enter apoptosis, then is that only during the time that they are actively on nicotine? And then when they do return to baseline, or as you demonstrated earlier, below baseline, their bodies can then recover? Or
Correct.
Is it kind of stuck there, and then the new information that would be received by the cells from environmental toxins, then it works for that, but the previous cells it doesn't work for, or they do recover?
It can play catch up.
Okay.
It can
All
play
right,
catch
thank
up.
you.
But what and this is all in the lab. This is all very new. So I can't say this is exactly how it works. But what we're seeing in laboratories right now, this is a big worry. And what we're seeing with the young people, this generation, they're using from the moment they wake up to the moment they go to bed. So there's no downtime there. As soon as it wears off, their nicotine buzz, they're redosing. So that worries us. And then when we look, we also learned something new about nicotine too. It actually increases blood vessel growth, which is really interesting. And we're looking at that as acute high doses of nicotine for heart attack survivors injected into the heart muscles so that it proliferates blood vessel, so that heart tissue can regenerate or heal better. Now, when you combine taking away apoptosis with increased blood vessel growth, and you insert increased blood vessel growth into a mass of mutated cells, that mass is going to grow at an accelerated rate due to oxygen-rich blood being delivered very effectively. So this is all very scary stuff. I'm sorry. You thought this was going to be like, this is a vape device. This is what the kids do. This is how they hide it. I'm giving you the information and that hopefully some knowledge that you hopefully take with you and consult, can think about. So we have something called EVALI, e-cigarette or vaping use associated lung injury. All those FDA approved food flavorings, what we've found is that it starts with acute lung tissue irritation. It turns into chronic lung tissue irritation, and it turns into necrosis or scarring of lung tissue. And so pulmonologists are seeing young people coming in for chest, complaints of shortness of breath and chest pains. And when they do a chest x-ray, they're seeing portions of the lung replaced with scar tissue. And this is irreversible. This doesn't turn around. Young people are losing 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30% of their lung functions due to vaping. All right. And these are mostly caused by those food approved ingredients that have never been approved for heating and inhalation, right? And what we're seeing these ingredients attack are something called macrophages, or these are called phagocytes in biology. Alveolar macrophages, which live in the lungs, and they're the cleaners of our lungs. So if you've ever walked into a dark room with a sunbeam shining through it and you see dust floating in there, that's what we breathe every day. And embeds in our lungs. These macrophages, when looked at under the microscope, they look like a Pac-Man, and they envelop dust particles. They break it down and evacuate it out of the lungs through exhalation. And so these macrophages are the cleaners of the lung. And for whatever obnoxious reason, smoking didn't affect these guys. Yes, it made them work extra hard, but that's why smokers used to wake up in the morning and cough up a phlegm, spit it in the sink, and it was like brown. And it's because these cleaners of the lungs were breaking down the tar and the dead tissue and expelling it through exhalation. And they're laying down on their back all night and it's accumulating in their throat. And when they wake up, they need to clear their throat, and the byproducts of these macrophages come out. Vaping are killing these. The FDA-approved ingredients are rendering these non-functional, all right? And so we're seeing that the cleaners of the lungs are not able to operate. And so that's why we're seeing acute lung irritation, chronic lung irritation, and scar tissue, because the lungs are not clearing themselves. It's building up. And it's because of propylene glycol and vegetable glycerin, both FDA-approved food agents. It's being delivered in an aerosol form, particulate matter suspended in a water molecule. All right. Vaping is just a trending term we came up for it. All right. When we look at the industry, and it's, Juul was kind of the home run king. Juul was setting the standard for, several years. Now the FDA came after them, and they're unable to sell their flavors in brick and mortar. You have to order it online, which is a little more difficult through their website for young people. So Juul really is focused on adult users as their main consumer now, whereas when they first came out, they were targeting young people. And their ex-CEO, their founder, James Moses, stated, chemically, nicotine is very similar to caffeine, and coffee is one of the most widely traded products in the world. While people of all ages around the world enjoy coffee, nicotine has been heavily stigmatized. This gentleman, I use that term very lightly, knows everything that I just discussed with you, and he's comfortable stating this. The only thing that caffeine does, other than, yes, it does raise your heart rate just a little bit, but not anywhere near nicotine levels. And if you have a healthy heart, you can really, I believe 600, anything less than 600 milligrams is considered okay. But for most of us, we're somewhere around like 60 to 120 milligrams of caffeine a day. That caffeine removes a neurotransmitter called adenosine, which is our tired chemical. Adenosine, when binds in a receptor site, makes us tired. Caffeine dislodges it and replaces it and makes us feel not tired. And that's how caffeine works. It's nothing. It's not chemically similar at all. to nicotine, but this is the sales, this is the marketing that young people will hear, and it sticks. And they'll even say to their parents, well, you drink coffee, why can't I vape? Nicotine is similar. And I talked about, pulse and heart rate, brain response, emulates the same brain response when somebody's agitated, right? Fight or flight mechanism. Youth report symptoms, withdrawal symptoms with as little as 5 cigarettes worth of nicotine a week, right? That's about 5 milligrams of nicotine a week. Each cigarette provides you with about 1 milligram of nicotine delivered to the bloodstream. Now, these pod systems, just a single pod has about 40 to 50 milligrams in each pod. All right. It's not uncommon for me to have conversations with 8th and 9th, 10th graders, and they're sharing that they're using a pod a day. That's equivalent to over 2.5 packs of cigarettes a day. All right. So we've never seen a generation of young people use the level of nicotine that this generation is using. And today's vapors are tomorrow's smokers. And what I'm seeing with my adult populations who come in for treatment, they're all around 27 or 28. And this is really something in the last several years, because at 26, they can no longer be on their parents' insurance. They lose the ability to maintain their parents' health insurance. And so now at 27, they have to get their own health insurance. And what they're discovering are for good health insurance, they're requiring physicals and hair samples, which will show the last 3 months of nicotine use in their hair. All right. And if they're a nicotine user, they're going to be paying double or triple the amount that a non-nicotine user will pay for health insurance. And so they're knocking on my door saying, I need to quit smoking because of health insurance, or clean indoor, tobacco-free employers, smoke-free workplaces, nicotine-free workplaces. We'll hire you if you're a smoker, but you need to quit within 60 days. Right.
That's really fascinating, because that's new. When we were younger, they didn't have that technology that they would require samples or anything like that for self-paid health insurance. Wow.
Yeah. And that's why employers are going, nicotine-free workplaces, because a lot of employers are, every year they have to rebargain their health insurance costs, right? And so if you're a nicotine-free workplace where your employees are non-smokers, you're going to get a better plan. You're going to get a better rate. Your employees are going to be happier, more productive. You're going to retain qualified and effective employees. So that's what we're seeing. So that's why people are quitting smoking now. And the smokers who are coming in, when I do the assessment, I ask, well, how long you been smoking? They're like, 4 or 5 years. I'm like, hold on, wait a minute. You're 26, 27, and you've only been smoking for 4 or 5 years. Why did you start at 21, 22? Nobody does that. Everybody started smoking when they were 15. Well, I vaped for 5 years before. I guarantee it. If they're a vapor and they don't quit, they will become a smoker. Because once that young person or that young adult freebases tobacco material at the end of a cigarette and feels the nicotine response in a cigarette, it's different from vaping, and they like it. And so now they're going to smoke when they can, in freedom of places that have no, requirements of not smoking. And in places that don't allow them to smoke, they're going to vape. They become dual users, and now they're doubling down on the lung tissue. So we're going to take a look at what's available out there. These are puff bars. These are, I just want to check on my time, make sure I'm being respectful of everybody. I have 7:10, 7:08. Is that correct, Doc?
It is 8:08.
I mean 8:08. Yes, thank you.
Yes,
I'm still
no
living.
problem.
I'm not going with this daylight saving time.
You didn't switch over. No, you're fine. You're fine.
8:08. So we still have 22 minutes. Great. We're on track.
You're going.
So the FDA deemed flavoring was targeting youth, and so they put down any disposable nicotine product that comes that sources their nicotine from the tobacco plant, which was all of the products, can no longer sell flavors. And so the industry was like, oh my gosh, that's going to kill us, because the majority of our purchasers are under 21 who want blueberry ice and lush ice and banana ice and strawberry, like that's the flavors. And so, many of these, these manufacturers went out of business. This was several years ago. This was going on 3 years ago now. Puff Bar came up and said, okay, cool. They decided to make their own fully synthetic nicotine from scratch. And so in the FDA guidelines, it says any product that sources nicotine from the tobacco plant cannot use flavorings. They skirted the FDA deeming or regulations. And so they can sell these flavors legally now. Now the FDA is pushing back. It's currently in the courts, and it'll probably take another year or two and lots of money, right? So this is how the industry pushes back. You or I are not going to buy blueberry ice or lush ice. We're going to buy like, tobacco or, maybe mint or, but these are the flavors that are targeting you. All right. And even we're starting, and I know everything that's sold in California has this on it, right? Which is known in the state of California to cause cancer. What we do know now, because I explained to you how it takes away the apoptosis function of our cells, this should mean something. Nicotine does not cause cancer fully. We're starting to see that it does have carcinogenic effect, but its true nail in the coffin, for a better word, is it takes away your body's ability to fight cancers. It allows cancers to flourish. And these are going to be online purchases. And, I do other presentations such as internet safety and dark web browsing. This is real. Young people have no problem getting on the dark web, which is called the Tor browser. All right, sounds a little better than the dark web, which has none of the safety guidelines or anything that the normal internet functions at. So up here, we have normal internet. Down here, we have government internet, which is very strictly tight. And then down here, we have the dark web. This functions without any age verification, without any stolen credit card verification, without anything. All right. You can buy IDs, you can buy, social security numbers, you can buy all of this, and young people can download what's called a Tor browser and upload it onto their phone to where they can sit in class or their break or wherever they're doing it and order stuff off of the dark web or the Tor browser. So most of the young people who are regular users are getting not only their nicotine, but their marijuana from the dark web. And these are some of the products. Tanks. This is going to offer, these can be personable, personalize them with design. These are generally going to be used by advanced users. So if you catch a child, if you catch a young person with one of these and they say, oh, well, yeah, I just started, doing it last week. No, this isn't the fit. If they just started last week, this is what they're going to be using. These are more dialed. You can adjust the temperature, the throat hit, and the dose. You have a tolerance now, so you need a higher level of nicotine. This is going to be the one. All right. UL Amlin. These are going to be, discreet, easily hidden ones. Watches that are fully function, even have like calendars and planners in them. You just dislodge them from the holder and you can vape it. And these are refillable. Fully digitized, and smart devices that tell you how many watts you're putting out in each hit, how much battery life you have left, how much juice is left in the pod or the refillable tank. You can control the temperature. So these are, you can, there's lots of different ones. When we're seeing young people trying to be discreet, these are going to be typically the ones, though, because you can just hold them in the hands. These are going to be the ones that are found in their bedrooms that they are using outside of the environments where they need to be discreet. All right. That looks like a lighter, a UL Caliburn, very similar to the Jewel Pod. The majority of that body is a battery. And then you have, look on the right there, those pods. That is the mouthpiece that contains the juice, the e-juice. This is a hoodie. You don't have to buy this particular brand. You can buy the kits. It's basically a drawstring that you replace the drawstring in your favorite hoodie, and then you just stuff the device up into the collar of the hoodie, and it's air activated. You don't need to press a button. As soon as you draw on it, the device detects that air movement and it starts to heat up the coil. And you don't need to pull a big puff like that. You can just do it micro hit. You can make it look like you're chewing on your drawstring and just go and swallow it. So, the discreetness, right? Some the espresso is targeted best for beginners because it will take you from your beginner stages to your expert use stages. But again, these are not going to be the ones that are typically found in schools. Those are going to be the ones that are found in under the bed and in the speakers, that kind of stuff. In the Coke can that's actually got the removable bottom, and it's like a fake Coke can, or the Mountain Dew that looks like it has liquid in it, but you unscrew it and there's you can buy those in Spencer Gifts. Right? The original Jewel, that's what most pods look like, is you have a container, a pod that holds that propylene glycol vegetable glycerin FDA approved food ingredient that contains nicotine. That little gold thing is the coil that heats up and aerosolizes or vaporizes that fluid, and that silver tube is the mouthpiece where the aerosol actually finds its way down into your lungs. All right. So these are disposable, but they can be hacked, and they can be taken apart and used for THC. Now that I'll show you, just notice how clear that is, right? That's very clear fluid. We'll take a look what THC looks like. One of the biggest arguments with THC or marijuana in general is that, hey, previous generations used it and we turned out okay, right? It's nothing like previous generations. Today, the average THC content ranges, for flowering material, anywhere from 17% up to 30% THC for flowering material, bud material that you would put in a bowl or roll a joint. For vape device, which are called carts or hash oil products, anywhere from 60 to 100% THC. In the 80s, when I was in high school, it was about 3.5%. And the only thing that was available was flowering material. And that was it. 5 people smoke it, you laugh for 20 minutes, you end up with a wicked headache. That's not the case with today's marijuana. And young people aren't going to want to carry a bag of weed, a lighter, a bowl, or rolling papers because that smells, the flowering material smells just carrying it. If you're caught with a lighter or rolling papers, you're now a paraphernalia on it. It's just too easy to get caught with. So the majority of young people who are using marijuana are using the hash oil products, which are 60 to 100% THC because of its discreetness. Now, that does not mean this flowering material is harmless. These are very high potent medical grade buds here, flowering materials. You can see how green, a lot of that white powder, that's the THC trichomes on there. This is what hash oil products look like: wax, shatter, honey, and oil. Now, I want to show you, remember when we were looking at nicotine, right? Annotate, excuse me. Line. Remember, this was nicotine, right? About 10%, lasts for about 15 to 20 minutes and puts you down there, right? These were the 5%, these were the 15%, these were the 25%. Marijuana, this is done by brain scan and magnetic resonance imaging. We get to watch this happen in real time. 100 to 150% increase in dopamine. I can't even draw to scale here. And it lasts for an hour to 2 hours to 3 hours, depending on the type and the potency, again, not to scale. And when it wears off, if they're a regular user, they're going to be also in the basement. And so now marijuana, what you're seeing with young people is they may lose not only interest and change their friendships, but they might also lose interest in hobbies and academics, and a more severe, they might go from that A to the D or even the F. And they might stop playing a sport because that 100, 150% can't compare. And they might be okay giving up nicotine as long as they can hold on to their marijuana use. So I bring in marijuana because it's vapable, right? Because it can be used, and it can be used in devices that are designed to vape, devices that are used to vape nicotine. This was the marijuana that was available to my generation. Very low THC, stems, seeds, very natural. You throw seeds in the field, you'll let it grow. The male plant fertilizes, it fertilizes the female plant with pollen. It produces THC for maybe, several days, and that's it. And then it's harvested, and that's the marijuana that was smoked for thousands and thousands of years, right? 3.5% THC. This is today's hybridized that eliminates the male pollen from ever pollinating the female to shut down the production of THC. And so now THC is produced for 30, 40, 50 days past any natural levels. This was never supposed to happen in nature. This is mankind manipulating nature, taking the male plant out of the picture and allowing the female plant to produce an unnaturally high level of marijuana. So that old, saying of, oh, it's not a drug, it's just a plant. No, it's a manipulated plant that is very much a drug that can lead to addiction, dependency, loss of interest in things that are meaningful and passion in young people's lives. Can adults use this responsibly? Theoretically, yeah, occasionally. But anything used in excess can lead to dependency and risk benefit, right? Should this be exposed to developing teens' brains? No. That whole that 7% reduction in likelihood of experiencing a substance use disorder in their adult years for every year delayed. That's why we're trying to get the young people say, hey, I'm not saying just say no, but here are reasons why you might want to avoid use and wait till you're 21 to decide if that's something that you want to do. This is the hash oil. See how dark that is? That is very high THC hash oil. These are devices that you can put that hash oil in. All right. This is how you hack a jewel pod. You take it apart. You drain out the clear fluid, and you inject a watered down hash oil, and now it becomes yellow. Or you can put in straight hash oil to where it will be very dark. And that's how you determine if you find a jewel pod or a vape pod on your, on your child or your teenager's person, and you take it apart and you look at it. If it's clear, it's e-juice. If it's like a gold to a brown, that's hash oil. All right. And you can buy, these on the dark web, online, if you're 21 or older in states where, or if you have a medical card, and you can see these are going to be gold color in that liquid. These are all THC pods. All right. Again, e-juice, nicotine juice on the left, hash oil on the right. That's how you can tell the difference. And then, of course, vaporizing is relatively not new. We've had something called knife hit since the 70s, where you heat up 2 butter knives on your stove and you press it and flaring material between those 2 knives, and it aerosolizes the plant material to a vapor or a very high potency, high density THC hit. All right. So if you find some like butter knives that are black on the end and you're like, why are my butter knives black on the end? Somebody's been knife hitting. And when you're burning at that high temperature, terpenes, which are like the flavor and the cannabinoid makeup of marijuana, they degrade into something called methacrylene and benzene, which are, pulmonary irritants, essentially, to keep it just simple. They irritate lung tissue. And then, of course, adulterants in cannabis products. Again, they use vitamin E acetate as a thickening agent to make weak hash oil thicker and darker so that they can sell it at a higher cost. Unfortunately, the vitamin E acetate, has some pretty serious effects on the lung tissue as far as, again, taking out the macrophages, causing acute chronic lung irritation. All right. So now just some smokable forms of marijuana, just so you know, these are some, these are what, tie sticks is what was something from the 70s and 80s, which was like a 5% THC flowering material rolled in the leaves of the marijuana plant. And, it was viewed as like, wow, that's really potent, but it really wasn't compared to today's. Today's really potent are something called moon rocks, which is 30% THC flowering material rolled in 100% hash oil, rolled in 100% kief, which is the pure THC that's shaken off of the plant. And so young people are partaking in this, and there's never been a previous generation that has had access to something like this in the last really 2 generations. The last 20 years, the last 15 to 20 years, this has come about. So this generation may be the tail end of the other one. All right, so we have about 7 minutes left for some Q&A. And as you're doing Q&A, if you don't mind, go ahead and scan the post test, see how you do. Doc, are there any questions out there?
I do have some questions. Okay, so first of all, can you discuss some of the vapes that are considered smokeless? Are they actually smokeless, or are they doing those micro hits where you can't tell if there is smoke coming, or are they real? Because I keep hearing this smokeless vapes. But
Yeah.
could you explain
so
it more?
Smokeless vapes is the industry itself. There is no smoke. It's water vapor, particulate matter suspended in a water vapor, and aerosol. So those thick, like maybe you're sitting at a red light and this ginormous like cloud billows out of the car in front of you, and then it dissipates quickly. It doesn't like hang around. That's aerosol. All right. That is vape, water molecule with particulate matter. The propylene the propylene glycol, the vegetable glycerin, looks like a smoke when it first comes out, but it dissipates quickly into the air.
So it's almost like a mist, but it's still visible.
It's still visible.
Okay.
But it doesn't qualify as smoke. And now the micro hitting is just that, yes, they're just taking a very small puff of aerosol, of water vapor, and they're swallowing it, ingesting it into their gut instead of exhaling. So since it's aerosol, once they swallow it, nothing's going to come back up because that aerosol has now been absorbed into.
So they have they done any studies about what that does to your digestive system?
They're starting to. I don't have any data that we can hypothesize, but there's no strong data. There's no real lab research yet stating causal effect. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So another question was, so the vape products were introduced to the market as a safe alternative to smoking the tar-based nicotine cigarette. And we discussed nicotine, but the actual aerosol, what impact is that in itself? Like, so I know that several years ago, there were vape pens that did not contain nicotine. They were just flavors. And I think it was to get kids used to having a flavored inhalant.
Yes. Yeah.
But the aerosol attached to that, can you talk a little bit more about the aerosol component?
So the aerosol of the flavor only was food flavorings and food ingredients that were causing lung irritation due to the attacking of the alveolar macrophages, right? It's just it was leaving out the nicotine, the increase in dopamine, the increased heart rate, blood pressure, constriction of arteries. But when you put the nicotine in the mix now, yes, the aerosol is the very thing that's attacking and irritating the lung tissue, which turns into scar tissue, which, eliminates the macrophage's ability to clean the lungs, combined with the increased heart rate, increased blood pressure, constricted arteries. So it's not smoke, it's not tobacco, it's not tar, it's literally, food ingredients that are being heated and inhaled into lung tissue. We don't have longitudinal study. We don't have 15, 20-year twin studies on this. All we're seeing are, being able to link together, cause and effect in pulmonologists and doctors, and, looking at x-rays and being like, okay, this is what this person reports. This matches up with this person results. And they're connecting the dots. We're not going to know hard outcome data for another 5 to 10 years.
That's just so scary, in
Yes.
itself, that statement.
Yes,
Because
this
it's
generation
like
of young people are our lab rats.
Right. Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
Go ahead.
some resources. How do you, get a young person to quit? Well, good luck. You can't necessarily get them to quit, right? Because they're YOLO. You only live once. Everybody's doing it. So you kind of gotta interview them, find out why they do it, right? You don't want to shame them. You don't want to bribe them. Ask why they do it, and engage in conversation. See if there's something else that they could do instead. Maybe they need to spend more time, maybe they would benefit spending more time with, friends or other hobbies or interests, discover if there's other things that they can do. Remember that when I said, the clear expectations, boundaries, and guidelines, have those in place, right? But they really have to be the ones who want change. They really have to be it. And these are some resources that you can use for them. The good news is young people's brains, since they're still developing, they respond better and they will quit easier than an adult brain that's been formed and hardened, and those behaviors are ingrained now, part of the foundation. Young people's brains are still very malleable, clay-like. They can unlearn a behavior and remold it, right? So there's no better time for young people to quit.
All right. Well, I just wanted to take a moment to thank all of the families that joined us tonight for our presentation. And did you have anything else you wanted to add before we close?
I think I probably overwhelmed many people, so I'll just leave it at that.
I think that this is absolutely excellent, and I really want to sincerely thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us. I think that your presentation was filled with so much information, and if it was a lot of information, do not worry, because it will be posted on the district website. This was recorded, so you can watch it in doses or watch it multiple times, and maybe even watch it with your children at home and your young adults. So I wanted to say thank you so much to David Fialko, and thank you to all the families that joined us this evening. I hope that you have all learned something from this presentation and enjoyed your time while Neshaminy's Families Connected with David Fialko from the Council of Southeast Pennsylvania. So thank you so much and have a wonderful night.
Thank you, Dr. Potter.
Yep.
Have a great
Thank
night.
you.
Thank you, buddy.
You too. Bye-bye.
Take care.